My husband abandoned me while I was pregnant by text. 9 years later, he broke into my backyard to kidnap our son. The text message arrived at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. I was 8 months pregnant, swollen ankles, propped on pillows, unable to sleep because our baby kept kicking my ribs. The phone's blue light cut through the darkness of our bedroom, and I reached for it expecting maybe a work emergency or my mother checking on me again. Instead, I found 3 words that would split my life into before and after. I'm done. Sorry. Below that, another message. Don't try to contact me. I need to be free. You'll be fine. I sat there in the dark, reading those words over and over, waiting for my brain to make them mean something different than what they clearly said. My husband of 6 years, the man who had held my hand during the ultrasound just 2 weeks earlier, the father of the child currently doing gymnastics in my belly, had just ended our marriage via text message at 2 in the morning. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I sent messages. They showed as delivered but never read. I threw on a robe and waddled to the garage, my heart pounding so hard I worried about the baby. His car was gone. Half the closet was empty. His laptop, his favorite books, his gym bag, all vanished. He had planned this. While I was sleeping, while carrying his child, he had packed his things and disappeared like a thief in the night, leaving nothing but a text message and the faint smell of his cologne in the empty closet. I didn't cry that night. I was too shocked for tears. I sat on the edge of our bed, hand on my belly, feeling my son kick and roll, and something crystallized inside me. Something hard and cold and absolutely unbreakable. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 37 now, but I was 28 then, a pediatric occupational therapist with a modest career and a supposedly stable marriage. Daniel and I had met at a friend's wedding, one of those romantic comedy scenarios where we were both in the wedding party and kept getting paired together for photos and dances. He was charming, successful in commercial real estate, and seemed genuinely excited about starting a family. The pregnancy had been planned. We'd talked about names, painted the nursery together, argued playfully about whether our son would inherit my stubbornness or his athleticism. Or so I'd thought. Apparently, while I was nesting and preparing for our future, Daniel was preparing his escape. The abandonment itself was devastating, but what came after was worse. In the weeks following that text, I discovered the betrayal ran deeper than a moment of cold feet. Daniel had drained our joint savings account, leaving me with exactly $312. He'd canceled the joint credit cards. He'd even taken my name off our car insurance without telling me, and I only discovered it when I tried to use it at a prenatal appointment. When I finally reached him through his work email, begging him to at least help with medical bills, his response was clinical. You wanted this baby more than I did. Figure it out. I gave birth to our son, Jacob, on a rainy April morning. My mother was there, holding my hand through every contraction. My sister drove through a storm to make it in time. My best friend from college took a week off work to help me those first impossible days. But Daniel? He didn't even know his son had been born. I'd stopped trying to contact him. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't have known because he'd blocked me on everything and changed his phone number, was that abandonment had consequences. Legal consequences. Financial consequences. I hired a lawyer with money my mother loaned me, and we went after him for child support with the fury of someone who had been discarded like trash. The court system moved slowly, but it moved. Daniel tried to claim he wasn't the father. The paternity test proved otherwise. He tried to claim he had no income. His tax returns said differently. Eventually, the judge ordered him to pay. Not enough to make up for his absence, but enough to keep Jacob fed and clothed. For 9 years, that child support arrived like clockwork, deposited automatically into my account. For 9 years, Daniel remained a ghost. No birthday cards for Jacob. No Christmas presents. No phone calls. The only proof he existed at all was that monthly deposit and the child who looked more like him with every passing year. I rebuilt my life carefully, deliberately. I advanced in my career, eventually opening my own pediatric therapy practice. I bought a small house with a fenced backyard in a good school district. I made sure Jacob had everything he needed, surrounded by people who genuinely loved him. My mother, my sister, my friends, they became Jacob's family. Daniel was just a name on legal documents, a biological fact with no emotional weight. Jacob asked about his father sometimes. Why doesn't my dad want to see me? He'd asked at 5 years old, watching his friend's father push them on the swings at the park. I'd knelt down to his level, choosing my words carefully. Some people aren't ready to be parents, baby, but that's about them, not about you. You are so loved. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. You're perfect. But I could see it in his eyes as he grew older. That question mark, that wondering. Why wasn't he enough to make his father stay? I hated Daniel for that most of all, for making my beautiful, brilliant, kind-hearted son question his own worth. I never spoke badly about Daniel in front of Jacob. I never told him the details of the abandonment, the text message, the drained bank accounts, the cold rejection. I figured when Jacob was old enough, if he asked, I'd tell him the truth. But until then, I'd protect him from that pain as much as I could. Years passed. I dated occasionally, never seriously. Most men ran when they discovered I had a son and significant trust issues around abandonment. The few who stuck around long enough to meet Jacob eventually revealed themselves to be incompatible in some way. I made peace with potentially being single. Jacob and I were a team, and that was enough. I also, without telling anyone except my lawyer, kept tabs on Daniel, not in a stalking way, but in a protective way. I knew he'd remarried 3 years after abandoning us. I knew he had moved to a different state. I knew his real estate business was thriving. I knew because knowledge was power, and I'd learned the hard way that being unprepared left you vulnerable. What I didn't know was that his new marriage had failed. What I didn't know was that he'd been lurking on my social media media through fake accounts. What I didn't know was that he'd been watching Jacob from a distance, learning his routine, our routine. I should have known something was coming. The child support payments had stopped 3 months earlier. My lawyer was in the process of taking him back to court. Daniel had responded through his attorney that he wanted to renegotiate the custody arrangement, that he wanted to be part of Jacob's life now. Absolutely not, I'd told my lawyer. He abandoned his infant son. He doesn't get to waltz back in 9 years later and play dad. We can fight it, my lawyer had assured me. His abandonment is well documented. Any judge would see he's not entitled to suddenly demand custody. But I should have seen the warning signs. I should have recognized that a man who would drain a pregnant woman's bank account and disappear wasn't a man who played by the rules. I should have known he wouldn't go through proper legal channels. On a sunny Saturday afternoon in June, 9 years and 2 months after Daniel had sent that text message, I was in my kitchen making lunch. Jacob was in the backyard, playing with his soccer ball, visible through the window above the sink. It was a perfect day. Warm, but not hot. Clear blue sky. Jacob's laughter carried through the open window as he practiced dribbling around the garden gnome I'd bought him as a joke. I was slicing tomatoes for sandwiches when I heard the gate latch click. Our backyard was fully fenced, 6 feet of solid wood privacy fence with a locked gate. The click of that latch shouldn't have been possible. I'd locked it myself that morning. I looked out the window just in time to see a man slip through the gate and move quickly toward Jacob. Time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does during emergencies. My brain recognized who it was before my heart wanted to accept it. 9 years older, grayer at the temples, but unmistakably Daniel. He was reaching for Jacob, grabbing him by the arm, trying to pull him toward the gate. Jacob, who had never met his father, who didn't know what Daniel even looked like, started screaming. I dropped the knife and ran. The back door seemed miles away, even though it was only a few steps. My hands fumbled with the handle, precious seconds lost, while through the window I could see Jacob fighting, kicking, trying to pull away from this stranger who had invaded our safe space. "Jacob!" I screamed as I burst through the door. "Let go of my son!" Daniel's head snapped up. Our eyes met for the first time in 9 years. There was no recognition of wrongdoing in his expression, no shame or guilt. Instead, I saw entitlement, anger, as if I was the one doing something wrong by interrupting his kidnapping attempt. "He's my son too," Daniel said, still gripping Jacob's arm. My 9-year-old was crying now, terrified, looking at me with wide eyes that begged me to make this stop. "Let him go right now," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, even though every cell in my body was screaming. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking as I unlocked it. "I'm calling the police. You can't keep him from me," Daniel said, but he released Jacob's arm. My son ran to me immediately, wrapping his arms around my waist, burying his face in my shirt. I could feel him trembling. "I can and I will," I said, already dialing. "You abandoned him as an infant. You've had zero contact in 9 years. And now you've broken into my property and attempted to kidnap him. You think any court is going to give you custody after this?" Daniel's face reddened. "I've been paying child support. That gives me rights." "You stopped paying 3 months ago," I said. The emergency dispatcher answered, and I spoke clearly into the phone, never taking my eyes off Daniel. "I need police immediately. A man has broken into my backyard and attempted to kidnap my 9-year-old son. The suspect is the child's biological father who abandoned him at birth and has no custody rights." I gave the address, and the dispatcher assured me officers were on their way. Daniel stood there, seeming to calculate his options, run or stay and try to talk his way out of this. I could see the exact moment he decided to try manipulation. "Sarah, please," he said, and his voice took on that familiar tone, the one he'd used when we were married and he wanted something. Smooth, reasonable, as if I was being irrational. "I made mistakes. I know that, but I want to make it right now. I want to be in Jacob's life. That's not a crime. Breaking and entering is a crime," I said. "Attempted kidnapping is a crime. You don't get to terrorize my son and then ask for understanding." "Mom, who is he?" Jacob asked against my shirt, his voice small and scared. Before I could answer, Daniel said, "I'm your father, Jacob. I've been trying to see you, but your mother won't let me." The lie was so blatant, so shameless, that for a moment I couldn't even speak. Jacob looked up at me, confused. "Is that true? Is he my dad?" "Yes," I said quietly. "But no, he hasn't been trying to see you. He left when you were still in my belly, and this is the first time he's shown any interest in you." "That's not true," Daniel started, but the sound of sirens cut him off. 2 police cars pulled up in front of the house. I could hear car doors slamming, footsteps hurrying around the side of the house. I'd left the side gate unlocked, thank God. 2 officers appeared in the backyard, hands on their belts, assessing the situation quickly. "Ma'am, are you Sarah Mitchell?" the first officer asked. "Yes, this is Daniel Morrison, my ex-husband. He broke through my locked back gate and tried to grab my son. I have security cameras that recorded everything." This was true. After years of being a single mother, after years of feeling vulnerable, I'd installed a comprehensive security system 6 months earlier. Cameras covered every angle of my property, including the backyard. Every second of Daniel's intrusion was recorded. Daniel's confident expression faltered. "There are cameras?" "Yes," I said, "which means there's video evidence of you breaking into my property, grabbing my son against his will, and refusing to let go when he tried to get away. That's kidnapping, Daniel. That's assault. That's trespassing." The second officer moved toward Daniel. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous," Daniel said, but he complied as the officer cuffed him. "I'm his father. I have rights." "Ma'am, do you have a custody agreement on file?" the first officer asked me. "No custody agreement exists because he's had zero custody since birth. He abandoned us when I was 8 months pregnant and has had no contact with Jacob until today. My lawyer has all the documentation. Daniel hasn't paid child support in 3 months and was being taken back to court. I believe this was his attempt to avoid legal proceedings by simply taking taking Jacob. The officer nodded, taking notes. We'll need a statement from you, and we'll need to see that security footage. Sir, you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping, trespassing, and assault of a minor. As they read Daniel his rights, he stared at me with pure hatred. You've turned him against me, he hissed. I didn't have to turn him against you, I said quietly. You abandoned him. That's on you. They led Daniel away. Jacob and I stood in the backyard, his arms still wrapped around me, and I felt him start to cry. Not the scared crying from when Daniel grabbed him, but the deeper, more painful kind. The kind that came from understanding. That was really my dad? He asked. Biologically? Yes. Why did he try to take me? I don't know, baby, but he can't take you. You're safe. I promise you're safe. The officers took my statement. I showed them the security footage on my phone, synced to the camera system. The video was clear and damning. Daniel climbing over the fence using a ladder he positioned beforehand. Daniel grabbing Jacob. Jacob trying to pull away. Me running out. All of it documented in high definition. This is excellent evidence, Dongyer, the officer said. Combined with the abandonment history and lack of custody agreement, the DA will have a strong case. He'll likely face multiple charges. After the police left, after I'd given my statement and downloaded the footage for them, after Daniel was officially arrested and booked, I sat on the back porch with Jacob. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The backyard looked peaceful again, but I knew we'd both carry the memory of what happened here. Are you okay? I asked, even though I knew he wasn't. I don't understand, Jacob said. If he's my dad, why did he leave? And why did he come back like that? Why didn't he just knock on the front door? These were the questions I'd been dreading for 9 years. I'd known eventually I'd have to tell him the truth, but I'd hoped it would be on my terms when he was older, when he could understand nuance and complexity. Instead, Daniel had forced this conversation by his own actions. Your father left before you were born because he wasn't ready to be a parent, I began carefully. He sent me a text message saying he was done and then disappeared. I tried to contact him, but he blocked me. He didn't want to be found. Jacob's eyes were wide. A text message? Yes, I was 8 months pregnant, and he left in the middle of the night with half our belongings and sent me a text saying it was over. That's so mean. Yes, it was very mean. It was also cowardly. Real parents don't abandon their children, Jacob. Real parents stay even when things are hard. Then why did he come today? This was where it got complicated. I think he decided he wanted to be a father now, but he didn't want to go through the legal system because he knew any judge would deny him custody after what he did. So instead, he tried to take you by force. That's kidnapping. Yes, baby, that's kidnapping. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he asked the question that broke my heart. Is there something wrong with me? Is that why he left? I pulled him close. This beautiful child who looked so much like his father but had a heart infinitely better. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You are perfect. Your father's choices were about his own weaknesses, not about you. Never about you. Do you think he loves me? How do you answer that? How do you tell your child that their biological father is essentially a stranger who abandoned them and then tried to kidnap them? How do you balance honesty with not destroying their sense of self-worth? I think your father is a very confused person who makes very bad choices, I said finally. I think he's someone who runs from responsibility and only thinks about himself. Whether he's capable of real love, I honestly don't know. But I know that you deserve better than what he's offering. We sat there as darkness fell, and I held my son while he cried for the father he'd never really had, and now never would have. The betrayal I'd felt 9 years ago, reading that text message alone in the dark, came flooding back. But this time it was worse because now Daniel had hurt not just me, but Jacob too. My phone rang. My lawyer, Rebecca, who I'd called immediately after the police left. Sarah, I just heard. Are you and Jacob okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally, it's going to take time. I've already been in contact with the DA's office. They're going to prosecute this aggressively. Breaking and entering, attempted kidnapping of a minor, assault, violation of an implicit custody arrangement. Daniel's looking at serious charges. Good. There's more. I did some digging after you called. Daniel's second marriage ended because he was having an affair. His business is failing. He's in significant debt. I think he saw Jacob as a solution to his problems. What do you mean? There's a life insurance policy on Jacob that Daniel never canceled. He's still listed as the beneficiary. If anything happened to Jacob while in his custody, Daniel would receive $500,000. The world seemed to tilt. My stomach dropped. Do you think he was planning to hurt Jacob? I don't know. But combined with his financial situation, his sudden interest after 9 years of nothing, and the fact that he attempted kidnapping instead of going through legal channels, it raises serious questions. I've already notified the police about the insurance policy. After Rebecca hung up, I sat there in the dark, Jacob asleep against my shoulder, and felt ice water in my veins. Daniel hadn't just been trying to take Jacob. He might have been planning something much worse. The next morning, I woke up exhausted despite barely sleeping. Jacob had crawled into my bed around midnight, something he hadn't done since he was 5, and I'd spent the rest of the night listening to him breathe, making sure he was real and safe and still here. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind against the windows, had my heart racing. I made breakfast on autopilot. Pancakes, Jacob's favorite, though he barely touched them. He sat at the kitchen table, pushing food around his plate, his eyes distant. 9 years old, and he was processing betrayal and danger in ways no child should have to. Honey, I think maybe we should talk to someone, I said gently. A counselor. Someone who can help you work through what happened yesterday. Jacob nodded without looking up. Okay, my phone buzzed. Rebecca, my lawyer, asking if she could come by. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in my living room with a briefcase full of documents and a grim expression. The police finished their investigation of the security footage and the ladder Daniel used. She began. There's more evidence than we initially thought. He'd been watching the house for at least a week. They found binoculars in his his rental car, along with a detailed schedule of Jacob's routine. What time he left for school, when he came home, when you typically left for work. The cold feeling in my stomach intensified. He was stalking us. Yes, and there's something else. Rebecca pulled out a folder. The life insurance policy I mentioned, it was purchased 7 years ago, 2 years after he abandoned you. He never told you about it, never asked you to sign anything. He used Jacob's social security number and forged your signature as the custodial parent. That's fraud. Yes, the insurance company is investigating now. But it gets worse, Sarah. The policy has a double indemnity clause for accidental death. If Jacob had died in an accident while with Daniel, he would have received $1 million. My hands started shaking. I looked toward the kitchen where Jacob was still sitting, and the reality of what might have happened crashed over me. You think he was planning to kill him? Rebecca's face was grave. I think the evidence strongly suggests that possibility. The DA agrees. They're adding conspiracy to commit murder to the charges. Oh my God, there's more. Daniel's financial situation is even worse than we thought. He's facing bankruptcy. His house is in foreclosure. He owes money to some very dangerous people. Apparently, he'd been making some bad investments, and when they went south, he borrowed from the wrong crowd to try to cover his losses. I felt sick. So he saw his son, the child he abandoned, as a way to solve his money problems. It appears that way. The good news, if you can call it that, is that with all this evidence, Daniel won't be getting bail. He's being held pending trial. And Sarah, given the severity of the charges, he's looking at decades in prison if convicted. After Rebecca left, I sat on the couch and cried. Not delicate tears, but the ugly, gasping kind that leave you exhausted. I cried for the woman I'd been 9 years ago, abandoned and pregnant and terrified. I cried for my son, who'd been targeted by his own father. I cried from relief that my security system had worked, that I'd acted quickly, that Jacob was safe. But underneath the tears was something else, something harder. A cold, crystalline fury that had been building for 9 years and was now fully formed. Daniel had abandoned us when we were most vulnerable. He'd stolen our money, our security, our peace of mind. He'd forced me to rebuild from nothing while he went on with his life. And then, when his choices caught up with him, when he faced consequences for his own actions, he decided to solve his problems by potentially murdering our son. The abandonment I could have forgiven, eventually, maybe. The financial betrayal I'd already overcome. But this, planning to hurt Jacob, that was unforgivable. That demanded something more than justice. That demanded consequences so severe he'd never consider trying something like this again. Over the next few weeks, the case against Daniel built steadily. The DA's office was thorough, uncovering layer after layer of his planning. They found searches on his computer for how to make accidents look natural and life insurance investigation triggers. They found text messages to an unknown number discussing handling my problem. They found proof that he'd purchased the ladder he'd used specifically for this purpose, along with gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. The insurance fraud case opened up its own investigation. Apparently, Daniel had taken out similar policies on 2 of his business partners, both of whom had died in convenient accidents in the past 4 years. Those cases were being reopened. Daniel wasn't just a deadbeat dad and attempted kidnapper. He might be a serial killer. The media got hold of the story. Father arrested for attempting to kidnap son for insurance money made local headlines, then regional, then national. My phone started ringing constantly. Reporters wanting interviews, true crime podcasts requesting to cover the case. I declined them all. This wasn't entertainment. This was my life, my son's trauma. But I did agree to one interview with a local news station that had covered family law reform in the past. I wanted other single mothers to know what could happen, to be vigilant, to protect themselves. The segment aired on a Tuesday evening. I watched it with my mother, who'd moved in temporarily to help with Jacob. On screen, I looked tired but composed. Daniel Morrison abandoned his infant son 9 years ago, I said to the camera. He had no contact, no relationship, no involvement in Jacob's life. Then, when he faced financial ruin of his own making, he saw his son not as a person, but as a solution, an asset to be liquidated. If I hadn't had security cameras, if I hadn't acted immediately, my son might not be here today. The interviewer asked, "What do you want people to know about this case?" "I want people to know that abandonment has consequences," I said. "That you can't discard your children and then come back when it's convenient for you. I want other single mothers to know that they need to protect themselves, document everything, install security systems if possible. And I want my son to know that he is loved, that he is valuable, that his life matters infinitely more than any amount of money." The segment ended with a hotline number for domestic violence and a website for legal resources for single parents. My phone lit up immediately with messages of support from friends, colleagues, and strangers. But there was one message that caught my attention. An unknown number. "You have no idea what you've started. You should have just let him go." I forwarded it immediately to the police. They traced it to a burner phone, but the message itself was enough to add witness intimidation to Daniel's growing list of charges. Jacob started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ace Chen, who specialized in childhood trauma. After his sessions, he'd be quiet for a while, processing whatever they'd discussed. Slowly, gradually, I saw small improvements. He started eating normally again. He slept in his own bed most nights. He laughed at cartoons. One evening, about a month after the incident, Jacob and I were making dinner together. He was carefully measuring rice while I chopped vegetables, and he said, "Doctor, Chen says that sometimes people are broken inside and they hurt others because they're hurting." "That's true," I said carefully. "But she also says that being broken doesn't make it okay to hurt people, that we all have choices." "That's also true." Jacob was quiet for a moment, focused on pouring the rice into the cooker. "I don't think my dad chose right." "No, baby, he didn't. Dr. Chen says I don't have to forgive him. That forgiveness is for for when someone is actually sorry and trying to do better. She says it's okay to just be done with someone who hurts you. I put down my knife and turned to face him fully. Dr. Chen is very wise. I think I'm done with him, Jacob said, and his voice was steady. Not mad anymore. Just done. That's a very healthy choice. Will you always be there, Mom? Always. I promise you. Always. The pretrial hearings began in September. I attended every single one, sitting in the courtroom in the gallery, making sure Daniel saw me there, making sure he understood that I wasn't going away, that I wasn't backing down, that he would face every single consequence of his actions. Daniel's defense attorney tried various strategies. First, they claimed he just wanted to see his son and had been overcome with emotion. The security footage disproved that. His approach had been calculated, methodical. He'd brought tools, planned his entry, grabbed Jacob with clear intent. Then they tried to claim the insurance policy was innocent, just a father planning for his son's future. The search history and text messages destroyed that argument. No loving father searches. How long do police investigate accidental child deaths? Finally, they tried to claim he'd been under extreme stress from financial problems and wasn't thinking clearly. The DA countered with evidence that the planning had occurred over months, showing premeditation and clear thought. The preliminary hearing judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all counts: attempted kidnapping, breaking and entering, assault of a minor, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness intimidation. Daniel's bond was set at $5 million. He couldn't make it. He would remain in jail until trial. I watched him being led back to holding, and our eyes met one last time. I saw something in his face that might have been regret, but it was too little, too late. Whatever he was feeling now didn't change what he'd done, didn't erase the abandonment, the planning, the attempt to hurt our son. As I left the courthouse that day, a journalist approached me. Ms. Mitchell, how does it feel knowing your ex-husband could spend the rest of his life in prison? I stopped and considered the question carefully. It feels like justice, I said finally. Not revenge, justice. He abandoned his infant son, then tried to murder that child for insurance money. The punishment should fit the crime. Do you feel any sympathy for him? No. I feel sympathy for the child he abandoned, for the 9-year-old he terrorized, for the victims of his other alleged crimes. But for Daniel himself, no. He made his choices. Now he gets to live with them. That night, after Jacob was asleep, I sat in my home office and pulled out a box I'd kept hidden for 9 years. Inside was every document, every text message, every receipt from those early days after Daniel left, the hospital bills I'd paid alone, the court documents ordering child support, the pathetic text message that had started it all. I'd kept these things as evidence, but also as a reminder that I'd survived something devastating and come out stronger, that I'd built a good life for Jacob despite everything, that I'd protected us both. Now, I added new items to the box: copies of the police reports from the attempted kidnapping, the insurance fraud investigation documents, articles about the case, not as reminders of pain, but as proof of justice. The trial date was set for January, 3 months away. My lawyer assured me the case was solid, that conviction was almost certain given the overwhelming evidence. I believed her, but I also knew better than to count on anything being certain. I'd learned that lesson 9 years ago. In the meantime, life continued. Jacob thrived in school, made new friends, joined the soccer team for real this time. I expanded my therapy practice, hired 2 new therapists to help with the growing client list. My mother eventually moved back to her own place, confident that Jacob and I were okay. We were more than okay. We were strong. We were survivors. And we were ready for whatever came next. The trial began on a freezing January morning. The courthouse steps were slippery with ice, and my breath came out in white clouds as I climbed them with Rebecca beside me. Media vans lined the street. This case had captured public attention in a way few family law cases did, probably because it had everything: abandonment, betrayal, attempted murder, insurance fraud. It was the kind of story people couldn't look away from. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. I recognized some faces: my mother, my sister, friends who'd taken time off work to support me. But there were also strangers, people drawn by the media coverage, curious about the man who'd allegedly tried to kill his own son for money. Daniel was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed in front of him. He'd lost weight in jail. His face was drawn, his hair completely gray now. He looked older than his 38 years. When he saw me sitting in the front row, something flickered in his eyes. Not remorse, more like resentment. The jury selection took 2 days. The prosecution wanted people who would be sympathetic to single mothers and outraged by child endangerment. The defense wanted people who might believe in second chances, who might see Daniel as a desperate man who made a mistake rather than a calculating would-be killer. In the end, 12 people were chosen: 8 women, 4 men, ranging in age from 25 to 67. A teacher, a nurse, 2 retirees, a construction worker, an accountant, a small business owner, and others whose occupations I didn't catch. These 12 strangers would decide Daniel's fate. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating. The assistant district attorney, a woman named Patricia Valdez, who specialized in crimes against children, laid out the timeline methodically. 9 years ago, Daniel Morrison sent his 8-month pregnant wife a text message at 2 in the morning. 3 words: "I'm done, sorry." He abandoned his family, drained their joint bank account, and disappeared. For 9 years, he had 0 contact with his son Jacob. No birthday cards, no phone calls, no visits, nothing except court-ordered child support payments. Patricia moved closer to the jury box. Then, 3 months ago, those payments stopped. Mr. Morrison's second marriage had failed. His business was collapsing. He owed money to dangerous people. He was drowning in debt with no way out. That's when he remembered something. He had a son on whom he'd secretly taken taken out a life insurance policy 7 years earlier, forging the custodial parent's signature. A son worth $1 million if he died accidentally. The jury was riveted. Patricia continued, "The evidence will show that Mr. Morrison spent weeks planning. He rented a car under a fake name. He stalked his son and ex-wife, learning their routines, their schedules. He purchased equipment. He searched online for ways to make death look accidental. And then, on June 15th, he broke into their backyard with the intent to kidnap Jacob Morrison, aged 9. Thanks to security cameras and a quick-thinking mother, he was stopped. But the evidence will show you exactly what he was planning, and it will chill you to your core." Daniel's defense attorney, a man named Robert Chase, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, gave a much weaker opening statement. He tried to paint Daniel as a man who'd made mistakes in the past, but had genuinely wanted to reconnect with his son. The kidnapping attempt was reframed as a desperate father's misguided effort to spend time with a child he'd been kept from. It was a thin argument, and you could see from the jury's faces that they weren't buying it. How could they, when the evidence was so clear? The prosecution called its first witness, me. I took a stand feeling oddly calm. I'd practiced my testimony with Patricia dozens of times. I knew what questions were coming, what points we needed to make clear. As I was sworn in, I glanced at Daniel. He was staring at the table, jaw clenched. Patricia began gently. "Ms. Mitchell, can you describe your relationship with the defendant?" "We were married for 6 years. We'd been trying to have a baby for about a year when I got pregnant with Jacob." "And how did Mr. Morrison react to the pregnancy?" "At first, he seemed happy. We planned together, painted the nursery, talked about names. It seemed like we were both excited." "When did that change?" I took a breath. "The night he left, I was 8 months pregnant. I woke up to a text message at 2 in the morning. It said, 'I'm done. Sorry, don't try to contact me. I need to be free. You'll be fine.'" "And did you try to contact him?" "Yes. I called multiple times. All my calls went to voicemail. I sent messages that were delivered but never read. When I checked, his car was gone. Half the closet was empty, and our joint bank account had been drained except for $312. Several jury members looked shocked. One woman shook her head in disgust. Patricia entered the text message into evidence, displaying it on a large screen for the jury. Those 3 words looked even colder in that context. "I'm done. Sorry." "After Mr. Morrison abandoned you, did he attempt to contact you or his son in any way over the next 9 years?" "No. The only contact was through the court system for child support. He tried to claim he wasn't the father. A paternity test proved he was. He tried to claim he had no income. His tax returns proved otherwise. Eventually, the court ordered him to pay child support, which was automatically deposited, but there was never any personal contact." "Did Jacob ever ask about his father?" My throat tightened. "Yes. He asked why his dad didn't want to see him. He asked if he'd done something wrong. He asked if there was something wrong with him that made his father leave." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that his father's choices were about his father's weaknesses, not about him, that he was perfect and loved. I never spoke badly about Daniel in front of Jacob, but I also couldn't explain why a father would abandon his child, because I didn't understand it myself." Patricia let that sit with the jury for a moment before continuing. "Now, let's talk about June 15th of last year. Can you describe what happened that day?" I walked them through it step by step, making lunch, seeing the gate latch click, watching Daniel grab Jacob through the window, running outside, calling the police. The security footage was played for the jury, and I watched several people flinch when they saw Daniel grabbing my terrified 9-year-old son. "After this incident, did you learn anything about why Mr. Morrison might have suddenly appeared after 9 years?" "Yes. My lawyer discovered that Daniel had taken out a life insurance policy on Jacob 7 years ago without my knowledge. He forged my signature. The policy had a double indemnity clause for accidental death, meaning if Jacob died in an accident, Daniel would receive $1 million. The gasps from the gallery were audible. Even some jury members looked openly horrified. Patricia entered the insurance policy into evidence. "And were you aware of Mr. Morrison's financial situation at the time of the attempted kidnapping?" "Not initially. I learned later that his business was failing, he was facing bankruptcy, his house was in foreclosure, and he owed significant money to dangerous people." "In your opinion, based on all the evidence, what do you believe Mr. Morrison's intention was when he broke into your backyard and grabbed your son?" Robert Chase objected. "Calls for speculation." The judge considered. "I'll allow it. The witness can answer based on the facts she's presented." I looked directly at the jury. "I believe he intended to take Jacob somewhere isolated, stage an accident, and collect the insurance money. I believe my son's life was worth $1 million to him, and nothing more." The cross-examination was brutal, but ineffective. Robert Chase tried to suggest I was bitter about the abandonment and was exaggerating the threat. He tried to imply that maybe Daniel had just wanted to talk to Jacob and I'd overreacted. "Ms. Mitchell, isn't it true that you refused to let Mr. Morrison see his son?" "That's not true. Daniel never asked through proper channels. He never went through the court system. He simply showed up after 9 years and grabbed a child who didn't know him. But perhaps he felt you would refuse if he asked properly. Then he could have taken me to court. That's what the legal system is for. Instead, he chose to commit multiple crimes. You've profited from this situation, haven't you? You've done interviews. Your story has been in the news. I did one interview to warn other single mothers about the importance of security. I haven't been paid for any media appearance, and I'd trade every bit of publicity to have my son not traumatized." Chase tried a few more angles, but nothing stuck. The evidence was too clear, my testimony too consistent. When I stepped down, Patricia gave me a small nod. We'd made our points. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution built an overwhelming case. They called the police officers who'd responded to the scene. They called the forensic analyst who'd examined Daniel's computer and found the disturbing search history. They called the insurance investigator who testified about the forged signature and the suspicious nature of the policy. They called Daniel's former business partners' families who testified about similar policies he'd taken out on their loved ones before convenient accidents. 2 cases that had been ruled accidental at the time were now being investigated as potential homicides. Most devastatingly, they called Jacob. I'd tried to shield him from this. Patricia had assured me she'd be gentle, but watching my 9-year-old son walk to the witness stand and be sworn in made me feel physically ill. Jacob looked so small in that chair, his feet barely touching the floor. Patricia's questions were simple. Jacob, do you remember June 15th? Yes. Can you tell us what happened? Jacob's voice was quiet but steady. I was playing soccer in the backyard. I heard the gate open and I looked up. A man I'd never seen before came through. He walked really fast toward me and grabbed my arm. I tried to pull away, but he held on tight. I was scared. I yelled for my mom. Did the man say anything to you? He said, "It's okay, I'm your father." But I didn't know him. I'd never met him. I was really scared. What happened next? My mom came running out. She told him to let me go and she called the police. He finally let go and I ran to my mom. How did this incident make you feel? Jacob looked down. I had nightmares for a long time. I was afraid to go in the backyard. I was afraid he'd come back. Dr. Chen has been helping me, but it's still hard sometimes. Robert Chase's cross-examination of Jacob was brief and uncomfortable. He tried to suggest maybe Jacob had misunderstood. Maybe Daniel just wanted to give him a hug, but Jacob's answers were clear and consistent. He'd been grabbed against his will by a stranger. He'd been terrified. That was the truth. When Jacob stepped down, I met him outside the courtroom and held him while he cried silently against my shoulder. The defense's case was weak. They couldn't call Daniel to the stand because his search history and text messages would destroy him under cross-examination. They called character witnesses who testified that Daniel had been a good friend, a reliable business partner, before his financial problems. But even these witnesses admitted they hadn't known about the abandonment until the case made news. The defense tried to bring in a psychologist who testified about stress and poor decision-making, but Patricia demolished that theory on cross-examination. Doctor, does financial stress excuse attempting to murder your child for insurance money? Well, no, but does it excuse breaking and entering? No. Does it excuse stalking and planning over several weeks? No. So really, you're saying Mr. Morrison was stressed, but he still knew right from wrong and chose wrong, correct? The psychologist had to agree. Closing arguments came at the end of the 3rd week. Patricia's was powerful, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every damning search, every calculated step Daniel had taken. This was not a mistake, she concluded. This was not a moment of poor judgment. This was a father who looked at his son and saw dollar signs, who planned to trade a child's life for money. That is not desperation. That is evil. Robert Chase's closing was almost apologetic. He asked the jury to consider that people make mistakes, that we should have compassion for those struggling with financial problems, that maybe Daniel had just wanted to be part of Jacob's life, but his heart wasn't in it. You could tell he knew his client was guilty. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict, my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Rebecca squeezed my hand as we stood for the jury to enter. Jacob wasn't there. I'd made sure he stayed home with my mother. Whatever happened, he didn't need to see this. The jury foreman, a retired teacher named Margaret Chen, stood holding the verdict form. Her face was unreadable, but I noticed several other jurors looking directly at Daniel with expressions of pure disgust. On the count of attempted kidnapping, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of breaking and entering? Guilty. On the count of assault of a minor? Guilty. On the count of insurance fraud? Guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder? Margaret Chen looked directly at Daniel for the first time. Guilty. The courtroom erupted. My mother, who'd been sitting behind me, let out a sob of relief. Friends were hugging each other. Daniel's face had gone completely white. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, as the guilty verdicts continued through all remaining charges, including witness intimidation. The judge banged her gavel for order. The defendant is remanded into custody pending sentencing. Will reconvene in 4 weeks. As the bailiffs moved toward Daniel to take him back to holding, he finally turned to look at me. There were tears on his face now. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking. "Sarah, please, I'm sorry. I made mistakes. Tell Jacob I'm sorry." I stood up, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I walked close enough that only he could hear me. "You don't get to apologize to Jacob," I said quietly. "You don't get to ask for forgiveness. You abandoned him when he was helpless, then tried to murder him for money. You are not his father. You're just the man who hurt him." I was desperate. The debt, the pressure. I wasn't thinking straight. You had weeks to think. You planned every detail. That's not desperation. That's premeditation. And now you'll spend the rest of your life paying for it. Please, don't let him forget me. Tell him I loved him. I leaned in closer. He's already forgotten you, and that's exactly what you deserve. Daniel's face crumpled completely as the bailiffs led him away. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, no closure. Just a cold certainty that justice had been done. Outside the courthouse, media was everywhere. Patricia stood at a podium giving a statement about the verdict, about the importance of protecting children, about how this case demonstrated that custody and abandonment issues could have deadly consequences. When she finished, reporters turned to me. "Ms. Mitchell, how do you feel about the verdict?" "I feel that 12 people looked at the evidence and saw the truth," I said. "Daniel Morrison is not a victim of circumstances. He's a man who made calculated choices to hurt his son for financial gain. The verdict reflects that reality. What do you want to say to other single mothers facing similar situations? Document everything. Install security cameras if you can afford them. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And never, ever assume assume that a biological parent won't hurt their child. Daniel and I created Jacob together, but that didn't stop him from seeing our son as nothing more than an insurance payout. Will you be at the sentencing? Yes. I'll be there for every step of this process until Daniel is behind bars for as long as the law allows. That night, Jacob and I sat on the couch together. I'd explained the verdict in simple terms. 12 people had looked at what his father did and agreed it was very wrong. His father would go to prison for a long time. Does that mean he can't hurt us anymore? Jacob asked. Yes, baby. He can't hurt us anymore. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then asked, do you think he really would have hurt me? Like, actually hurt me? I'd been dreading this question, but Dr. Chen had coached me on how to answer honestly, without traumatizing him further. I think he was planning something very bad, yes, but we stopped him before he could do anything. You're safe. That's what matters. I'm glad we have the cameras. Me too, sweetheart. And I'm glad you ran fast when you saw him. I pulled him close. I will always run toward you when you need me. Always. The 4 weeks until sentencing passed in a strange blur. Life returned to a version of normal. Jacob went back to school, though his teachers knew to be watchful for any signs of ongoing trauma. I returned to work at my therapy practice, so I kept my schedule lighter than usual. The media attention gradually faded as other stories took precedence. The death threats I'd been receiving from Daniel's family members and a few misguided supporters finally stopped after 2 of the worst offenders were arrested for harassment. Rebecca informed me that the investigation into Daniel's former business partner's deaths had found enough evidence to charge him with 2 counts of murder. Those trials would come later, after he was sentenced for what he'd done to Jacob. The insurance company had voided the policy and was pursuing its own criminal case against Daniel. They'd also offered me a settlement for the fraud, which I accepted and immediately put into a trust fund for Jacob's future education. On sentencing day, the courthouse was less crowded than for the verdict. Most of the media had moved on, but I was there in the front row as Judge Martha Blackwell took her seat. Mr. Morrison, she began, looking at Daniel with barely concealed contempt. You've been convicted of multiple serious crimes against your own son. Before I impose sentence, do you wish to make a statement? Daniel stood, and for a moment I thought he might actually take responsibility. His lawyer had probably advised him to show remorse, to beg for mercy. Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes, he began, and his voice shook. I was under enormous pressure. The debt was crushing me. I couldn't think straight, but I never intended to actually hurt Jacob. I love my son. I just wanted to see him. The insurance policy was for his future, in case something happened to me. Everything got twisted and misunderstood. I watched him lie with the same smooth confidence he'd used throughout our marriage, denying reality even as the evidence sat in boxes beside the prosecutor's table. Judge Blackwell's expression didn't change. Mr. Morrison, I've reviewed every piece of evidence in this case. The jury found you guilty on all counts after seeing that evidence. Your search history alone makes it clear what your intentions were. How to stage accidental death, how long police investigate child accidents, life insurance payout timeline. These are not the searches of an innocent man trying to reconnect with his child. Daniel's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge held up her hand. I've presided over many disturbing cases in my career, but few have disgusted me as much as this one. You didn't just abandon your infant son. You then returned years later, not out of love or regret, but to end his life for financial gain. There is no punishment severe enough for what you plan to do. She opened a folder. On the count of attempted kidnapping, I sentence you to 15 years. On the count of breaking and entering, 3 years. On the count of assault of a minor, 10 years. On the count of insurance fraud, 10 years. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, 25 years. These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. That's a total of 63 years in state prison. Daniel's knees buckled. His lawyer caught him. 63 years. With good behavior, he might get out when he was 90 years old. More likely, he'd die in prison. Furthermore, Judge Blackwell continued, you are permanently prohibited from any contact with the minor child Jacob Morrison. No letters, no phone calls, no messages through third parties. If you attempt to contact him in any way, additional charges will be filed. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel whispered. Take him away. As the bailiffs led Daniel out, he looked back at me one more time. Whatever he saw in my face made him look away quickly. There was no forgiveness there, no sympathy, just the cold satisfaction of watching justice done. Outside, Patricia found me on the courthouse steps. 63 years, she said. The judge threw the book at him. He earned every year of it. There's something else you should know. The investigators looking into his former business partner's death found enough evidence to charge him. Those trials will proceed, but he'll already be in prison. If he's convicted on those, they'll add life sentences. Good. Patricia studied my face. How are you really doing, Sarah? I thought about it. I'm tired, but I'm okay. Jacob's okay. We're safe. That's what matters. You know, in all my years doing this job, I've rarely seen someone handle a situation like this with your level of strength. Most victims fall apart. You never did. I fell apart 9 years ago when he left, I said. I spent months barely functioning, terrified about how I'd raise a baby alone, furious at the betrayal. But I had Jacob. I had to rebuild for him. And in the process of rebuilding, I became someone stronger, someone Daniel never expected to face. He certainly didn't expect the security cameras. I smiled slightly. No, he didn't. He thought he was dealing with the same vulnerable woman he abandoned. He had no idea who I'd become. That evening, I picked Jacob up from my mother's house where he'd been staying during the sentencing. He looked at me expectantly. What happened? Your father will be in prison for 63 years. Jacob's eyes widened. That's like forever. Almost. You'll be an adult when he gets out if he lives that long. And even then, he's not allowed to contact you ever. Good. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then asked, are we done with court stuff now? Yes, baby. We're done. Can we go home? Yes. Let's go home. home. As we drove through the darkening streets toward our house, toward our safe place with its security cameras and locked gates and the life we'd built together, I felt something shift inside me. The hypervigilance that had defined the last 7 months was finally releasing its grip. The trial was over. Daniel was going to prison for the rest of his natural life. We were safe. Jacob fell asleep in the car, and I carried him inside, this 9-year-old who was already getting too big to carry, but who I could still manage for a little while longer. I tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, and sat in the chair beside his bed like I used to when he was small. In the quiet of his room, with only the nightlight casting soft shadows, I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for months. The fear when I saw Daniel grabbing Jacob, the cold horror when I learned about the insurance policy, the bone-deep rage at what he'd planned to do, and underneath it all, the grief for the marriage I thought I had, for the family I'd thought we'd be, for the father Jacob deserved but would never have. But I also felt something else. Pride in myself for protecting us, in Jacob for his resilience, in the system for working, for once, exactly as it should have, in the 12 strangers on that jury who'd looked at the evidence and seen the truth. Daniel had tried to destroy us twice. Once when he abandoned us, leaving me pregnant and broke and terrified, and again when he tried to take Jacob from me permanently for nothing more than money. Both times I'd been stronger than he expected. Both times I'd survived. More than survived. I'd built something good from the wreckage he'd left behind. As I sat there watching my son sleep peacefully, I thought about the woman I'd been 9 years ago, reading that text message in the dark, believing her world was ending. I wished I could tell her that she was right, that world was ending, but something better would rise from those ashes. A life built on her own strength, not dependent on anyone else. A relationship with her son that was worth more than any marriage could have been. A sense of self-respect that came from surviving the unsurvivable. I thought about Daniel, sitting in a cell somewhere, facing decades behind bars and possible murder charges after that. Did he regret his choices? Probably. But only because he'd been caught, not because he understood the depth of what he'd done. That kind of understanding required empathy, and Daniel had proven he had none. The house creaked as it settled for the night. Normal sounds, safe sounds. I listened to Jacob breathe, watched his chest rise and fall, and felt grateful for every single breath. Daniel had tried to take this from me. This peace, this safety, this child. He failed, and he would spend the rest of his life knowing he failed. 3 years have passed since Daniel's sentencing. Jacob is 12 now, tall and lanky, with Daniel's dark hair, but none of his coldness. The nightmares stopped about a year ago. He still sees Dr. Chen occasionally, but mostly he's just a normal kid who loves soccer, video games, and complaining about homework. The attempted kidnapping became something that happened to him, rather than something that defines him. He knows his biological father is in prison. He knows why, but it doesn't haunt him the way I once feared it would. Dr. Chen says that's because he never had a relationship with Daniel to mourn. You can't miss what you never had. What Jacob does have is a full life. My mother is grandma, always ready with cookies and embarrassing stories about my childhood. My sister is Aunt Rachel, who takes him to movies and lets him stay up too late when he sleeps over. My best friend from college, Lisa, is Aunt Lisa in all but name, teaching him terrible jokes and questionable dance moves. Last year, I started dating someone. Mark is a physical therapist I met through work, kind and patient and utterly uninterested in drama. When I told him about Daniel, about everything that had happened, he'd listened without judgment and then asked one question: "Are you and Jacob safe now?" "Yes." "Then that's the past. I'm interested in your future." It was the exact right thing to say. Mark met Jacob 6 months into our relationship, and they bonded over their shared love of terrible action movies and increasingly elaborate pranks on me. Last month, Mark moved in. Jacob helped him unpack, proudly showing him where everything should go in our house. One evening last week, the three of us were making dinner together. Jacob was grating cheese, Mark was chopping vegetables, and I was stirring pasta sauce when Jacob asked, "Mom, do you think you'll marry Mark?" Mark's knife paused mid-chop. I caught his eye across the kitchen, saw the careful neutrality there, the attempt not to influence my answer. "Would you be okay with that if I did?" I asked Jacob. Jacob shrugged, that universal 12-year-old gesture of studied casualness. "Yeah, I guess. Mark's cool. He doesn't try to act like he's my dad or anything. He's just Mark." "That's because you already have a mom who loves you more than anything," Mark said, recovering his composure. "I'm just the guy who's lucky enough to be part of your team." Jacob smiled. "You're pretty good at video games for an old guy." "I'm 35, not ancient." That's what old people always say. I watched them banter and felt something settle in my chest. This was family. Not perfect, not traditional, but real and chosen and good. The practice continued to thrive. I'd hired 3 more therapists, and we'd expanded into a larger space. I specialize now in working with children who'd experienced trauma, drawing on my own experiences to help families navigate the aftermath of abuse, abandonment, custody battles. Other single mothers found me through word of mouth. They'd sit in my office, tearful and terrified, trying to protect their children from dangerous ex-partners, and I'd tell them what worked for me. Document everything. Install security systems. Trust your instincts. Get a good lawyer. Don't back down. I became something I never expected, an advocate. I testified before the state legislature about the need for better protections for children in custody disputes. I consulted with police departments about recognizing red flags in parental abduction cases. I spoke at conferences about the intersection of abandonment and financial abuse. The case against Daniel for the murders of his business partners went to trial 2 years ago. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Similar insurance policies, similar accidental deaths, similar financial desperation preceding each death. The jury convicted him on both counts. 2 life sentences sentences added to his existing 63 years. I didn't attend that trial. I'd gotten the closure I needed at his first sentencing. Those were someone else's tragedies to witness, someone else's justice to claim. Daniel's family tried to reach out a few times in those early years. His mother sent a letter asking to meet Jacob, claiming she was an innocent grandmother who just wanted to know her grandson. I had Rebecca send a formal response. No contact. Ever. Jacob's life was better without people who'd raised someone like Daniel. His brother tried a different approach, showing up at my practice unannounced, demanding to know why I'd destroyed Daniel's life. Security escorted him out. I filed a restraining order. He violated it once, sitting in his car outside Jacob's school. The police arrested him. He didn't try again. The media attention faded, as it always does. For a while, we were that case people referenced when discussing parental kidnapping or insurance fraud. Then other cases took our place in the news cycle. I was grateful. The attention had served its purpose, warning other families, but I didn't need to be defined by Daniel's crimes forever. Last month, Jacob and I were cleaning out the garage when he found the box I'd kept hidden for so long, the one with all the documentation from those early days, the hospital bills, the court documents, the text message. "What's this?" he asked, pulling out a printout of that message. "I'm done. Sorry. I'd wondered when this moment would come. That's the text your father sent me the night he left. I was 8 months pregnant with you." Jacob stared at it for a long moment. "This is it? This is all he said?" "Yes." "That's so weird. Like, how do you end a marriage and abandon your kid with just 3 words?" "I don't know, baby. I've never understood it." Jacob put the paper back in the box carefully. "Can I see the rest?" We sat on the garage floor, and I walked him through each document. The drained bank account, the child support orders, the police reports from the attempted kidnapping, the insurance policy, all of it. He absorbed it quietly, occasionally asking questions. When we reached the trial transcripts, he stopped. "I don't think I want to read those. I remember testifying. That was scary. You were so brave. Did I help? Like, did what I said make a difference?" "Absolutely. Your testimony showed the jury exactly what happened and how it affected you. That mattered." Jacob closed the box. "Are you going to keep all this?" "I don't know. Do you think I should?" He considered it. "Maybe put it somewhere Jacob can look at it when he's older if he wants to. But I don't think you need to keep looking at it. You already know what happened. Out of the mouths of 12-year-olds, he was right. I'd been carrying this box, these documents, these reminders, as if I needed proof that my experience had been real. But I didn't. I'd lived it. The proof was in the life I'd built, the son I'd raised, the strength I'd found. That evening, I put the box in the attic. Not thrown away, but not front and center in my life anymore either. Available if Jacob ever wanted to understand his history more fully, but not defining our present. A few weeks ago, Mark and I were sitting on the back porch after Jacob had gone to bed. The same backyard where Daniel had once grabbed him, now transformed with new furniture, new plants, new memories. The security cameras were still there, but they'd become background, just another part of the house rather than a constant reminder of danger. "You ever think about him?" Mark asked. "Daniel? Not really. Sometimes I wonder if he's still alive, if prison has been as hard on him as he deserves. But mostly, I just don't think about him at all." "Good. He doesn't deserve space in your head. He never did. It just took me a while to understand that." Mark took my hand. "You know what I admire most about you? Not that you survived what he did. That's impressive. But lots of people survive terrible things. What I admire is how you refuse to let what he did make you bitter or afraid. You could have closed yourself off, never trusted anyone again. Instead, you built this huge life full of people who love you. I didn't have a choice. I had Jacob. I had to show him that one person's cruelty doesn't mean the world is cruel. You had a choice. You chose to be strong. That's different than not having a choice." Maybe he was right. Maybe strength was always a choice, made over and over again in small moments. The choice to get up every morning after the abandonment. The choice to fight for child support instead of just accepting the loss. The choice to install security cameras instead of living in fear. The choice to prosecute instead of letting it go. The choice to keep building a life instead of hiding from the world. Last week, Rebecca called with unexpected news. Daniel's appeal had been denied. It was his third and final appeal. There would be no more legal challenges, no possibility of a reduced sentence. 63 years plus 2 life sentences. Final. "How do you feel?" Rebecca asked. "Like a chapter is finally closed." "Good. You earned that closure." After we hung up, I sat with the news for a while. Final. It really was over. No more court dates, no more appeals, no more legal maneuvers. Just Daniel sitting in a cell for the rest of his natural life, while I sat in the home I'd built, with the son I'd raised, planning a future he'd never be part of. That evening, I told Jacob about the denied appeal over dinner. "So it's really over?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart, it's really over." "Good." He paused, then asked, "Do you think he thinks about us?" "I imagine he does, but what he thinks doesn't matter anymore. He made his choices. Now, he lives with them." "Do you ever wish things were different? Like that he'd been a good dad?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. I wish you'd had a father who was worthy of you. But I don't wish Daniel was different, because people like him don't change. They just find new victims. What happened to us stopped him from hurting other people. That matters. Jacob nodded, processing this. Then his face brightened. "Mark's teaching me to drive his truck in the parking lot next weekend. Is that okay?" And just like that, we moved on. From heavy conversations about his biological father to excited chatter about learning to drive. That's what healing looks like. Not forgetting the past, but not being trapped in it either. Mark came over and ruffled Jacob's hair. "Only if your mom says it's okay and you promise not to hit any light poles." "I promise." "Mom, can I?" "Yes, but I'm bringing a helmet." "Mo, that's so embarrassing." So is explaining to the insurance company why we hit a light pole. This was my life now. Normal conversations about normal things. Teaching moments and terrible terrible jokes and making plans for next weekend. The trauma was part of our history, but it wasn't our whole story. We were so much more than what Daniel had tried to do to us. Sometimes when Jacob is at school and Mark is at work and the house is quiet, I think about that night 9 years ago, the text message, the empty closet, the woman I was then, sitting in the dark, pregnant and abandoned and terrified. I wish I could tell her what I know now, that she would survive, that her son would be amazing, that she would find strength she didn't know she had, that the man who abandoned her would end up behind bars while she built a beautiful life. But I don't need to tell her. She figured it out on her own. Last night, Jacob and I were looking at photos together, something we do occasionally. There's one I love from his 6th birthday, before the attempted kidnapping, before the trial. He's laughing at something, chocolate cake smeared on his face, surrounded by friends. Pure joy with no shadow of what would come. I look so little there. Jacob said, "You were little. You've grown so much. Do you think I look like him? Like Daniel?" I studied my son's face. Yes, he had Daniel's coloring, his bone structure. But where Daniel's eyes were cold, Jacob's were warm. Where Daniel's smile was calculating, Jacob's was genuine. "You look like yourself," I said, "and that's perfect." Tomorrow, Mark and I are taking Jacob to look at middle schools for next year. Next month, we're planning a vacation to the coast, the 3 of us. Next year, who knows? Maybe Mark will propose. Maybe Jacob will discover a new passion. Maybe I'll expand the practice again. The point is, we have a future. We have plans and dreams and possibilities. Daniel tried to take that from us twice, and twice he failed. He sits in a cell somewhere, stripped of freedom and family and any chance at redemption, while we live the life he tried to destroy. Jacob is doing his homework at the kitchen table now, occasionally asking Mark for help with his math. Mark is patient, explaining concepts in ways Jacob's teacher can't seem to convey. I'm making dinner, listening to their voices, feeling grateful for this ordinary evening. This is what winning looks like. Not dramatic courtroom victories or media attention, or even the satisfaction of watching someone get sentenced. Winning is waking up every day in a house full of love, raising a child who knows his worth, building a life that matters. Winning is choosing strength over bitterness, hope over fear, love over hate. Daniel lost the moment he sent that text message. He just didn't know it yet. He thought he was escaping responsibility, freeing himself from the burden of family. Instead, he freed me from the burden of him. He gave me the opportunity to discover who I really was, what I was really capable of. In trying to destroy me, he forged me into something unbreakable. And that's the real justice. Not just that he's in prison, though that matters. The real justice is that Jacob and I are happy, that we built something beautiful from the wreckage he left behind, that his absence made space for people who actually deserve to be in our lives. The security cameras are still there, still recording. But now they capture nothing more dramatic than Mark teaching Jacob to shoot basketball hoops in the driveway, or my mother arriving with groceries, or the dog we adopted last year barking at squirrels. Normal life, safe life, good life. Sometimes people ask me if I regret marrying Daniel, if I wish I'd never met him. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain, the betrayal, the trauma. But without Daniel, I wouldn't have Jacob. And Jacob is the best thing that ever happened to me. So no, I don't regret it. I survived it. I overcame it. And in the process, I became someone I'm proud to be.